Hey, and welcome back to another video. So in our last video, we actually looked at how to write UI tests for when you want to push to a screen. Now in this video, we're going to look at how we can actually create UI tests for our form and also presenting, screens as well. So let's actually just go into our CreateView. So we actually just open up our app and we just open up our CreateView. What do we actually want to test here? Well, there's a few things we want to test. We want to test to see, first of all, does our CreateView actually get presented like you can see here? Also, does it handle validation properly? So if we enter invalid information, do we get the right error on the screen? Does it handle networking errors if this goes wrong? And does it also handle a successful submission as well? So let's get started. Now let's just go into our folder here, structure, and I'm just going to dismiss this and this. And within here, we're going to create a new folder called Create. So this is where our Create UI tests are going to live. So within here, the first test we're actually going to validate is whether our CreateView actually gets presented on the screen properly when you tap on this button. So let's create a new file, and our UI test case file is going to be called Create Screen UI Valid Test. Just to make sure that the UI on the screen is valid. So as usual, we're just going to just copy this and then paste this within our test file like so. Cool, sweet. So for this, we actually do want our people networking success to be 1 so that we're able to present our create screen. So we're just going to leave this as 1 as is now. So let's actually now define our test within this file. So I'm just going to write this out and then we'll break it down. Cool. So we're just writing our first test here to say when create is tapped, which is this plus button here, we want to make sure that the create view is created. So let's just run this UI test and see what happens, and it should fail. Cool. So it should fail like we expect. Awesome. So now we want to basically make sure that we can access this button easily within our UI test. Now in order to do that, similar to what we did in our previous videos, which you should check out about UI testing, we want to access that button using the accessibility identifier. So let's go into our people view, and within it, on our create button, we want to give this an accessibility identifier of create button, like so. Okay, cool. So now, if we go back into our UI testing file, we can now access that button by just simply, requesting it from our app. So here, we're just going to say let, and then we're going to say create button. I'm just going to say app.buttons, and then within here, we're going to use the identifier to access it from this array. So it's going to say create button, like so. Cool. So we want to make sure that our create button actually exists on the screen. So because this is an asynchronous, screen, I'm actually going to use the wait for existence to wait for it to show up on the screen, and then we can tap in it. So in here, we're going to say xet assert true, and then within here, we're going to say create button dot wait for existence, and the timeout is going to be 5. And then we're just going to write a message to say here that the create button should be visible on the screen. Okay, cool, sweet. So now after doing that, the next thing we want to do is actually tap on this button. So we're going to say create button dot tap, like so. Cool. So now when we actually tap on this button, what should happen is it should present our create screen. Because we've now presented our create screen, we want to validate that what you see on the screen here actually exists. So again, like what we did with our create button, we're going to give some of our UI on the screen some identifiers, mainly our text fields and our submit button here. So let's go into our create view. And then on our done button here, we're going to give it an accessibility identifier of done button. And then on our text field, we're going to do a similar thing, but this time we're going to call this first name text field, like so. And then I'm just going to copy this, and then we'll give this the last name text field, like so. And then our job, we're going to give this the job text field. And then on our submit button, we're going to give it the accessibility identifier of submit button, like so. Sweet, cool. So now in our UI testing file, after we tap on our create button, we now want to validate that we actually see all of this text on the screen. So the first one we're going to do here is actually check to see if the title create actually exists. So we're going to say here XCT assert true, and then we're going to say app.navigation bars, and then we're going to say create. Now I'm going to use wait for existence here. I'm going to wait 5 seconds. Now the reason why I'm doing that is because it might take some time for the app to actually present it because there's an animation. So that's why we're using the wait for existence, because we want to wait for it to basically make sure if it is lagging that it shows up on the screen. It's cool. So after this, we're going to check to see if there's a done button. We're going to check for our button. So we're going to use the ID that we give it, which was done button, like so. And then we're going to just simply check to see if it exists. Now the reason why I'm not doing wait for exists for the done button is because if we can see this create screen, that means that this screen is already presented on the screen, so there's no reason for us to have a timeout, so we don't need to wait for it because it's already presented. And then what we're going to say here is we're going to get our text field, so we're going to say app.textfields. And then within this text field, we're going to say first name text field, like so. I'm just going to make sure that it's the same identifier. Yep, cool. Okay, so let's just go back into our file. And then we're going to check to see if this exists, like so. And then we're going to copy this for last name, and then we're going to also copy this for job as well, like so. Cool. And then finally we're just going to test to see our submit button, so we're going to say submit button, like so. Cool, sweet. So let's actually just run this test and see if our UI is valid and what we expect on the screen. Cool, and our test passes because the correct UI is on the screen. Now one more thing to realize as well is that when you go into the app and you hit on plus to show the create screen, you can actually tap on done to actually dismiss it. Now you can also swipe to dismiss it, but the reason why I'm not actually unit testing that is because it's actually part of the system functionality, so it's something you get for free. So what I'm going to do is just actually test to see if you tap on done, this actually gets dismissed. So let's create a new test file, well, a unit test I should say, and we're going to call it test when done is tapped, CreateView is dismissed, like so. Cool. So within this, the first thing we want to do is we want to actually get our create button and tap it. So we're just going to copy this. And then what we want to do then is we actually want to get our done button this time. So similar kind of logic here. So we're going to say let done button, and we're going to say app.buttons, and then we're going to get our done button, like so. And then we're going to wait, we're going to make sure that the done button exists on the screen. So in our assert tree, we're going to say done button dot exists, like so. And then with our done button, we're then going to tap on it if it does exist. And then after we tap on our done button, we then want to check to see if the navigation title contains people. So we're going to say here XCT assert true, and then we're going to say app.navigation bars people, and then wait for existence, and then the timeout for this is going to be 5 because it might be animated and it might take a second. So we're going to say there should be a navigation bar with the title people, like so. Cool. So now let's actually just test this out to see if this works. Cool. Pause. So now let's actually just test this out to see if this works. Cool. And you'll see that our test now passes. So we've actually wrote our task here to basically make sure that when we actually present our create screen, the UI is valid, and when we actually tap on done, it automatically dismisses the screen, and we're on the right screen as well. Sweet. So the next test that we're going to write is our form validation. So let's create a new UI testing file called create screen form validation UI test. So we'll go in there and we'll create a new file. And we'll call it create screen form validation test. Cool. Sweet. So similar to before, we'll just copy this. Cool. Sweet. And like I mentioned before, so for this validation test, if you run it, it actually doesn't require any kind of networking. So we actually do want our people networking success to be 1, but we actually don't need another key just yet for our create validation. We're going to need another key when we get to the stage when we want to validate our UI, because when we want to control a success and a failure. But for now, we just need to, we can just keep this so we can actually access it via the people screen, which is what we want. So within this, we actually want to write a new test to validate where if all the text form fields are empty, what we want to do is when you tap on submit, we want to validate that you get the error on the screen telling us that the first name can't be empty, like what you're seeing here. So we want to do this. Cool. So let's just type out our test. And within our test, the first thing we want to do is actually access our create button and tap on it. And then this time we want to access our submit button and tap on it. So what we're doing here is we're just validating that the create button exists, and then we're making sure that the submit button exists on the screen here. So once we tap on the submit button, the next thing we want to do is actually validate that the alert on the screen that you see has the correct information. So let's first of all just get our alert. And then we also want to get our alert button so we can actually dismiss the alert later. So we're also going to get our alert button. So after here, we're going to make sure that the alert is visible on the screen. So we're going to say alert.wait for existence, and we're just going to wait 5 seconds. So we're going to say there should be an alert on the screen. And then after we, have our alert on the screen, we then want to validate that the text within it is correct. So we're going to say xct assert true, and then we're going to say alert.static text. And then within the static text, we want it to say first name can't be empty, exists. Cool. And then after here, we want to make sure that we have our button as well. So we want to check our alert button.static text. Okay. Exists. Cool. So you'll notice as well that if I tap on here, we have the alert, and you can tap on OK to dismiss it. But we also have this label here that gives us some more information to tell us like what has gone wrong. So let's now tap on our alert button. So we're going to say alert button.tap to dismiss it. What we're going to do here is we're going to check to see if our text on the screen actually exists. So we're going to say xct assert true, and then we're going to just validate that our app.static text says first name can't be empty, like so. Make sure that exists. Cool. And then we're also going to do one more test where we validate that our alert isn't on the screen, so there's actually no alerts on the screen at all. So we're going to say xct assert equal, and then we're going to say app.alerts.count is equal to 0, I'm going to say here there should be no alerts on the screen. Cool. Sweet. So now we have our instructions in terms of what it is we want to write our UI test for. So let's actually just run this and see what happens. And our test actually fails. So let's actually just run this and see what happens. So let's just print out alert button. And it's actually not, the alert button actually doesn't have a static text. It actually has a label that we want to check against. So rather than doing this static text exists, what we want to do instead is we want to actually say dot label, and we actually want this to be an XCT assert equal, and we want to check to see if this is equal to, okay, like so. So now let's try that again and see if this passes. Let's just run this. Cool, and now our test passes because we're now accessing the label, which is the text within the button, because it doesn't have any static text. Cool. So now we've done our first test there for making sure that when all the form fields are empty, it shows the correct error and everything is correct. The next thing we want to do now is we want to write a test to tell us if the first name within the form is empty, then we want to show an error which is similar to what we were testing before. So let's write our test function again. So what we're saying here is that we want to test when the first name form field is empty, the first name error is shown, which is what we want. So again, we want to copy our code here for our create button to actually, access and tap it to show our create screen. But we want to do something a bit different now. So what we want to do now is we actually want to access some text fields and actually type within them. So what we can do is we can access text fields on the screen by accessing via the text field property within, well, on our app using that element query. So we're going to get our last name text field, and we're going to say app dot text fields, and then we're going to access the array, and then within the array we're going to say last name text field, like so. And then what we're going to say here is that we're going to say let job text field, and then we're going to say app.text fields, and then within here we're going to say job text fields. So now we have access to both of our text fields that we want. So what you might be thinking you can just do is actually just type within a text field and then you're all good. But what you need to do and keep in mind is that when you're actually writing UI tests, you need to actually simulate an actual action that you would use when you're actually interacting with an app. So when you actually want to type in a text field, you need to actually tap it first. So what we want to do here is on our text fields, we want to say last name dot tap first, and then we want to type within them. So you'll see here that there's a function called type where you can actually type some text within that text field. So I'm going to say adds for now. And then in our job text field, we're going to say tap, and then we're also going to say type text, and then we're also going to say the role that we want here, like so. Cool. So now we're actually tapping and typing within our text field within our UI test, like so. Cool. So now what we want to do is actually tap the submit button and basically validate that the error that we see is correct. Now because the error that we're expecting is the first name can't be empty, we can actually just copy a lot of the code that we have here. So I'm actually just going to copy all of this code from the submit to the alerts count and just paste it below here, like so. So let's actually just run our test and see what happens. And you'll see that I'll automatically type in it and I'll hit submit, we'll get our error, we'll tap on OK, and then we'll validate it and it passes. Cool. So now we have our first UI test where we're basically validating the form and we're basically making sure that what we have in it is correct in terms of the error that gets presented to us. So now that we've done that, the next test that we want to do is actually validating that if we type into our first name and our job but leave our last name empty, we get an error telling us that you can't leave the last name empty. So just to make our lives a bit easier and to just like speed this up a bit, I'm actually going to copy this function, and then we're just going to tweak it a bit to say when last name form is empty. So rather than us actually getting the last text field here, we're going to change this to first name, and I'm just going to change the identifier as well to first name, like so. And we're going to change the tab and the type, and this time I'm just going to type in tons within the first text name text field, and we'll tap the submit button. But within here, we're going to change the alert that we're checking for. So rather than this being first name can't be empty, it's going to be last name, and this is also going to be last name as well, like so. Cool. So now let's just run this test and see what happens. And you'll see that that test also passes as well. So we have one more form validation that we need to do, and that's validating that if we leave our job text field empty, we should get an error telling us that the job field can't be empty. So again, let's just paste this in. So let's copy this, and then we'll paste it below, and we'll change this from when job form field is empty, pause, the job error is shown. And then at the top here, we also want to change this from first name to last name. So when the last name form field is empty, the last name error is shown. So on our job one, again, we're going to just change this to be a last name this time. And then we're going to change the text field that we access here to be last name, like so. And then on the last name, we're going to tap on this, and then we're going to change this to be ads. Cool. And then the final error that we need to check for here is that the job can't be empty, like so. Cool. So let's actually run this test again and validate this one now and see if our form is all good. Cool, sweet. So that's all good. So now we actually have all of our form UI tests sorted. So we actually have two more cases that we need to account for, and the next case that I want to account for is when our screen actually fails to make a network request. So let's create a new file, and we'll call this create failure UI test, like so. Cool. So now let's just copy this setup and tear down again. But this time is going to be a bit different. So we're going to leave our people networking success as it is, but we're actually now going to create a new launch environment argument, key value pair for our failure of our create screen when it tries to make a request. So here we're going to say create networking success. And because this is going to simulate a failure, we're going to just set this to 0 this time, which is what we want. Now, we now need to update our UI testing helper to actually have access to this. And we also need to fix the typo. This is networking, not networking. So networking success, cool. So now let's go into our UI testing helper, and we're going to create another static computer property called is create networking successful, and we're going to change this to create, like so. Cool. So the final place we need to use this in and update it in is within our create screen. So on our create screen, or create view I should say, what we want to do now is we actually want to generate an initializer for our closure, so we can actually do our dependency injection and check to see if it's a UI test change what gets injected into our view model. So let's just hold down command on our keyboard and then click on create, and then go to generate memberwise initializer, and that will create the initializer for you automatically, like so. Cool. Now, because we've actually created this initializer with our closure, we actually don't need this to be accessible anymore. So we can actually lock this off and just mark this as private so you can't access it. But within here, we want to use our macro processes to basically check to see if it's debug. So if debug, else, and then end if. And then within here, we're going to say underscore view model is equal to state object. And then the wrap value here is going to be our CreateView model, like so. Cool. So we also want to update this view model to now use the type, like so. Cool. And then within our debug, we're just going to say if UI testing helper dot is UI testing, else, and then we're going to say underscore VM is equal to state object, wrap value, create view model, like so. Cool. And then within here, we now want to create our mock. So we're going to say let mock is equal to, well, the type is networking manager implementation. And then we're going to say here our UI testing helper dot is create networking successful. And if it is, then we're going to use our create mock. So our networking manager create success mock. And if it isn't, then we're going to use our failure mock, like so. And then now we need to pass this mock into our view model. So we're going to say underscore view model is equal to state object, and then create view model. And then we don't want to pass in a mock validator because we just want to use the actual validator in this case. So we're going to say networking manager. And then for here, we want to just pass in our mock. Now, the reason why we don't want to use the validation manager is because we've done our validation UI test before. And also in the test that we're going to do now, we're going to simulate you filling out a form successfully. So all the information has been filled out. It's just the networking that fails. So let's go back into our UI test for our create. So our create failure UI test. And then what we want to do now is actually declare a test function. So we have that here where we have our test alert is shown when submission fails, which is what we expect. Cool. So within here, we want to access and, use our create button to actually, tap and show our create screen. So I'm just going to just nick some code here. So we're going to just copy this code here and just put that within our failure test, like so. Cool. And then we now want to actually type inside of all of our text fields. So again, I'm just going to take a bit of code here, like so. And then this time we want to access all of our text fields. So we're going to access our last name text field. And then in our last name text field, we're just going to type out, ads, like so. And then we're going to tap the submit button. And then we're going to access the submit button, wait for its existence, and then tap on it. But for here, we actually don't need to wait for its existence because it's already on the screen. So we're going to say exist here instead. Cool. And then now after we finish doing that, the next thing we want to do is actually validate that there's an alert on the screen telling us that, something's gone wrong. Now in our mock for our create, so in our create failure mock, the error that we throw is an invalid URL. So we're actually looking for that invalid URL error here. So let's get our alert. I'm going to say app.alerts.firstmatch. And then within here, we're going to see XCT assert true. And then we're going to say alert And we're going to wait for its existence for 5 seconds. And then after this, we're going to check to see if our alert has the correct message. So alert.static text. And then we're going to say URL isn't valid .exists. Cool. And then we're also going to check to see if our button with the text retry exists as well. So we're going to say our button OK exists. Sweet. So now let's run this again, and you'll see that our test actually fails, and the reason why is because I've done OK rather than OK in all uppercase like so. So let's run that and see what happens. Cool. And now our test passes, so this is all valid and this flow works. Now we have one final test case to actually write, and this is actually validating if our form is actually basically valid, and if it submits successfully, does everything go all right? We don't get no errors on the screen and whatnot. So in order to actually test this, let's create another one. So let's create another file, and we're just going to call this create screen UI test. And then we're going to just copy our setup and our teardown. Okay, cool. Now within our setup and our teardown, we don't want to set this to 0 because we actually want the create screen to be a success. So we're going to just set that to 1 so it actually passes through. And now let's actually just write out and define our test. Cool, so we're just testing here with a valid form submission is successful. So within this test, again, similar to before, we actually need to copy and type out all the information and hit submit. And then we want to make sure that when we hit submit that we're back onto the people screen here. So I'm actually just going to go into our test we wrote before for our failure UI test. I'm literally just going to copy all the code up until the submit button being tapped. So we're going to first of all get our create button, tap on it, enter some information into our text fields, and then tap on our submit button. And after this, what we want to do is we want to validate that there's a navigation bar on the screen with the text that says people, because we actually automatically dismiss our view when it's successful. So we're going to say here xct assert true app.navigation bars people, and then we're going to wait for its existence for 5 seconds. So we're going to say here there should be a navigation bar, title, people. Cool. So now let's just run this test and see what happens. So now we've wrote all the main UI tests that we're working with that interact with some kind of service, and we've also wrote tests as well with integration tests for our view models that interact with different dependencies, and we've even wrote tests as well for our unit test, which is as individual pieces of business logic. So we fully tested our application and the important key bits. So I hope you've learned a lot there. Now in the next upcoming videos, we're actually going to talk a bit more about what we've been doing, because it does have a name called test-driven development. And we're also briefly going to discover code coverage as well. So if you enjoyed this video, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comment section below. Also as well, if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you gave this video a thumbs up, as well as subscribe to the channel and hit notification bells to get updates for whenever I release a new video. That's everything from me. I'll catch you in a bit. Deuces.